Duke Ellington was once asked why jazz is important. He responded as follows: jazz is a good barometer of freedom. In its beginning, the United States spawned certain ideals of freedom and independence through which eventually jazz was evolved. And the music is so free that many people say it is the only unhampered, unhindered expression of complete freedom yet produced in this country. Today's Rotary program is about jazz. More specifically, it's about listener-sponsored KUVO, FM 89.3, a radio station that has been broadcasting jazz here on the Front Range and on the World Wide Web for 38 years. KUVO's dedication to playing the full spectrum of jazz has earned it international recognition and a worldwide audience. It would be a thrill and an honor to introduce either one of today's guests, but I get to introduce both of them together. You know their voices if you have tuned into the morning set on KUVO. Carlos Lando's broadcasting career began in 1968 on the Armed Forces Caribbean Network in Puerto Rico. It was the start of his more than 50 years on the air, including 36 years at KUVO, where he has served as on-the-air host, program director, president, and general manager. Steve Chavis has been the co-host of the morning set the last 11 years. His career in public radio began at WDET in Detroit. Before starting at KUVO in 2012, Steve was the news director at KBCO, KHOW, and KHI, and then spent a dozen years directing communications for an international nonprofit based in Denver. It is a joy to have these speakers here today. Please welcome Carlos Lando and Steve Chavis. Yeah, it's pretty big.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. We appreciate being here. And first thing, am I getting in the way of myself? I think so. I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand over here because we've got some. We used to call them slides. I don't know what they call them these days. What do they call those things? What slides are good. Okay, okay. But uh, just a word about community and about community radio, which for me has always really been the essence of public service. In the broadcast medium over all these years, I was reminded as a young man in Puerto Rico that when I got my first professional job, I was 19 years old and I walked into a little station in my hometown. I'd already been interning on the military base where my father was a Chief Master Sergeant in a Strategic Air Command in Puerto Rico at Rame Air Force Base. And so I went to school on the military base, but we lived in the community because that's where our people were and that's our home. So I had the best of both worlds in that regard. So the first day that I walked into this station, where I had gotten a part-time job, it was a shock because I was quickly indoctrinated to the fact that it doesn't matter what you think about uh, content necessarily. The question is, uh, can we sell it? If we can sell it, then it has value. You see. So that was my introduction to basically understanding that I had to kind of learn that radio was a business. I was reminded every day by general managers and sales managers and everybody else that I could have all the great ideas in the world, but if we couldn't sell it and we couldn't make a profit, then what good was it? So, and it was a learning experience. It was great. So many years later, that was 1969. In 1987, after KUVO had been on the air for only less than a year and a half, uh, down on Morrison Road in Denver. And I was working at KBCO. That's where Steve and I met for the first time in 1986. Um, I A job opened up as program director, and program director in radio is the person who decides what gets out on the air, who gets on the air, you know. And it was a music station, community, culture, and music. We didn't have that moniker yet. And we didn't have that slogan yet. We were the oasis in the city, and we still are. But we were predominantly a music station. So getting the job as program director for me was the ultimate. I never ever dreamed I would be there 38 years later, 37 years later with the station, and kind of closer to the end of the road than the beginning. So I found my calling because it was public radio, it was community radio. We could do things for content, good music, good conversation, deal with issues, work hand in hand with lots of organizations that benefit our community from all areas, all ethnicities, all ages, because it felt good to do so, and we knew that we were providing quote unquote a community service, not just a public service announcement. So that has been that's what drove me uh, uh, in terms of my experience in radio. That's what kept me honest, so to speak. The other part of it was that we're playing jazz in all its form, in all its areas, and music is the healing force of the universe, as one of our longtime hosts used to say every Sunday. Scotty used to say that on Origins, Orgy, and Rhythm. Maybe some of you might recall that show, where we would play music on the air from all over the globe. You know, the jazz has influenced a lot. You know, people talk about, well, rock and roll, yes, and now hip hop, but it all started with jazz. It all started with jazz in this country, and before that, it started with obviously gospel music and blues, and the suffering of people who uh, through their suffering and through their sacrifices gave us this music, and through it, it gave everybody a voice internationally. You know, the jazz is known throughout the world, and the United States government, to their credit, over the years, recognized that in order to get across the globe and present and talk about ideas and talk about things that benefit everybody, you could do it through jazz. Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest American ambassadors, yet he never had an office in any country. He was a great ambassador for America, as was Duke Ellington and many others. So for me, I look at it as carrying on a legacy. The first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve here real quick. Steve, why don't you say a few things, and then I'll.
First thing I might want to do is go back to that time in 1986 at KBCO. I used to live right over here on Osage, and I'd ride my bike to work on Riverbend Road. Um, Bob Greenlee, who owned the station at the time, had a two-story building, and I think Brad Beeler was the appraiser on the first floor. And I thought I might run into him here. I'm not sure. Uh, but when Carlos and I were working together at KBCO, I seem to recall I saw the announcement, the ad for that job at KUVO, and I showed it to you. So I'm pretty much taking credit for his entire career at at KUVO. It worked out. Uh, the theme for the station, our subline, is community, culture, and music, and some of our slides will speak a little bit to that. The uh, the event most recently, our big annual event is at a place called Balistrary Vineyards. We had the Count Basie Orchestra, which is still up, still running. And you know, our parents or grandparents will tell you that the Count Basie band, there was just none other like it, and they showed it again. They've been able to keep the same principles of music and musical integrity going through some very young and exciting players, and they tour the country and tour the world as the Count Basie Orchestra. So we get to bring that kind of music to the airwaves and actually in concert here in our town. It's at the vineyards, and so one of the important things about community is partnerships, and we all know how important those partnerships are to develop. We want to be partners with vineyards, and that gets us bottles of wine. And we get our own labels. And so this was one year, I think, back in 2013 when we were uh, celebrating with uh, some amazing, some amazing artists of the past, like Art Blakey, the late great Kevin Mahogany out of Kansas City. These two players, Dave Hansen and Al Hood, have just made music in our community so vibrant and so alive through their H2 big band. And Diane Reeves, who is an National Endowment for the Arts jazz master. She happens to live in Denver, Colorado, USA, and is arguably one of the greatest voices in living. And they are uh, great friends of the station, and it's great to bring this kind of partnership to people who are enjoying jazz, enjoying the music, enjoying the fellowship, the camaraderie, the wine, and so on. Every great community organization has a street team that gets out. That's part of why we're here today. Broadcasting, you sit in a studio, you open up the mic, and you tell people what you want them to hear. But that's never really been good enough. That's never really been sufficient to make for a successful enterprise of any kind. You've got to get out there. And so we've got booths and volunteers and friends that get out and tell the story of the station. I want to introduce our uh, community reporter and producer. She co-produces the morning show with us. Abby Clark is here with us, so please give her a quick hand. She keeps us straight and makes the morning show happen morning after morning. 6 a.m. walking in like, what are we doing today, Abby? Carlos, you're doing this. Steve, you're doing this. Here we go. And thank you for keeping us on track. Community culture and music. Um, it's it's working, I guess. We are community funded. You all are familiar with those community radio pledge drives where we're on the radio saying thank you very much. Please send us $5 or $10 a month as your membership, and we'll keep going for a while. In the meantime, we just put the music out there. We put the radio out there. We put the interviews out there. We've launched a website and an app, and we just put it out there. And out of the goodness of many people's hearts, we've been able to keep the thing going. Uh, and that's really it's kind of amazing. It's not supposed to work that way. It breaks all the rules. Give the product first, hope that people will pay for it, but they have. And that's really part of the miracle of KUVO.
One of the, uh, I guess, one of the culturally speaking about the radio station and connections to the community, I think is one of our greatest strengths. When I try to, we're on the radio. We have to paint pictures. I always talk about when I listen to a baseball game on the radio. Man, it's so much better than trying to follow it on TV. And even though they sped up the game, right? But in terms of the announcers and how they keep you locked in, radio is about telling stories. Radio is about connecting. Television is about. And I love TV. Don't get me wrong, but you have a lot of help on TV. You got you got your prompts. You got all these things. It's my way of saying essentially that when you tune into the radio, we are creating a very personal experience for every single person who's tuned in. It's not like right now where I'm standing up here and I'm talking to all of you together. On the radio, you're hearing something that you like and appreciate. You're hearing something that maybe you don't quite like as much as maybe another individual who's listening somewhere else. That kind of stuff. Maybe we're having a conversation about a topic that resonates with you very personally, and maybe not. But at the same time, we have earned your trust when you turn that radio on every morning. We've earned your trust, and you know that whatever we're touching on whether it's like super important or just laughing and having fun, because we got a chance to get fed on Eats and Beats Wednesday. The restaurant actually brought food in and fed us, and that's always a highlight for us on every Wednesday. So the community aspect is really, really important. I always visualize that KUVO is like a big family that has come together because jazz and great music brought us together, you see. So I don't know if anybody in this room ever, back in the day, used to frequent El Chapultepec. We used to call it the Peck in Denver at the corner of 20th and Market. And that's before they built the Coors Field. And that was the mecca for jazz. And it was a little dive hole in the wall that opened up in 1936. And it really embraced jazz in early 80s. Never a cover charge, but really a dive, right? But what a place to go catch music. They always had the side door open. Young musicians who either in high school or in college would come hang out, and listen to these musicians. All the greats came in from out of town. Would When they get done with their gig, back in the day, if it was a Trocadero or if it's at Five Points, they'd go to El Chapultepec. When you get inside El Chapultepec, you could be rubbing shoulders with a person who didn't maybe not have a lot going for them. You could just, but they had enough money to come in, buy a beer or buy a drink, and enjoy the music. Jerry Kranz and the Kranz family always embraced this, one for all for one. He could be rubbing shoulders with the governor of Colorado or, or a prominent person in our community. It didn't matter. Everybody was treated with respect and equally. Everybody had something to give just by being there. And I look at that as the spirit of KUVO. And that's what we do. We embrace multiple cultures through music. So it's community, culture, and music. What else do we have up here, Steve?
The story of El Chapultepec and their ethic is really part of jazz's secret agenda. There are a couple of slides here on the culture part of our credo. The business celebrity author Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." It really is about who we're eating with, who our kids bringing home to eat with. There is a secret agenda to jazz. There's something built into the music and the performance of jazz in its most true form, most raw form, in ensemble, in a club somewhere, maybe a smoky dive like El Chapultepec. Teamwork, the band playing together in unity. There is ethnic diversity built into this sound, this music that came out of the field hollers in Louisiana and the French minuets. Ethnic diversity is built into this music that came out of New Orleans and went around the world through, like you said, Louis Armstrong, ambassadors like Duke Ellington, Dave Brubeck, who took this music around the world as an example of what America could be. Ask any musician about the hard work and practice that it takes to master that instrument. The democracy, the sharing of time on the stage as they perform, and the listening to each other to create fills and accompaniment to make sure the gaps flow well together, that they're listening to each other as they play. It is a secret agenda, but now it's all out there in the open. I've spilled the beans. These are some of the reasons why we enjoy jazz so much. It's so interactive. And one of our young players, Braxton Kahn, the drummer, was recognized as being one of our 30 under 30 really talented young musicians. Braxton's dad is sitting right over there. So congratulations. You've raised a good one. And we're counting on young players like Braxton to take this music to the next level, to the next place. Thelonious Monk said, just because you're not a drummer, it doesn't mean you don't have to keep time. Everybody's got to, in this jazz community, which includes the schools, and there are schools of music, the clubs, the community organizations, the parents that drive those kids to practice and put up with the noise. The radio station is kind of a connecting tissue between the audiences and the players, and everybody's got their part to play. So we might feel like we're spectators, but you'll notice in jazz when the solo is done, the jazz audiences, they clap. That's your job. Audiences have a job in jazz.
Speaking of audiences, I always try to remember, and one of the things that I always preach to everybody who comes on the air at KUVO over all the years, it's not about you. I always tell them, I mean, you can have great success, it might go to your head, all of these kinds of things. But remember, you're nothing without the people. You're nothing without that listener, without that person that you are communicating with each and every day. And you have to do that with a certain amount of humility. You have to remember that you're not there to just play records for yourself. You're there to present a program that has an appeal across the board under this big multicolored umbrella that we call jazz. And the beautiful thing is that this music today that has gone through so many iterations, starting with the ragtime, right? Wasn't even called jazz. And then the word jazz started with Jass with Buddy Bolden. There's no recordings of Buddy Bolden. He had the superstition that if he recorded, then they would steal all his music. So he never recorded. And then the Dixieland Jazz Band and King Oliver, the whole New Orleans thing, started the swing era, the breaking down of racial barriers with some very significant band leaders like Benny Goodman, for example, and Brubeck and many others. Charlie Parker has his own story, what happened after World War II in the early days of this music and the innovations that came with it that kind of divided old school and new school jazz. Jazz all of a sudden wasn't danceable anymore, but it was danceable. It just depends on what your frame of mind was and how you moved and how you walked, or how you spoke. You know, it was in the music, and that didn't change. So with KUVO, we try to present that without I would say without preaching. Just put it out there and see if you dig it. And that's when we do it for you. And if anybody ever gets to a point where they get too deep or something, a nice reminder that you're here for your listeners. You're not here for yourself. So, and there's a million stories we don't have time for today that we've all learned our lesson as broadcasters sometimes that basically help us get centered back on the purpose of why we're here. I've got a few, back when I was really young, thinking that whatever I played, everybody was going to dig, and that wasn't the truth. One of the programs that we came up with over the years, which our audiences, not just jazz audiences, were able to appreciate was the show called the R&B Jukebox. As an example, it's been on the air for 25 years, and if you can remember back or have been exposed to rhythm and blues music, which was different than rock and roll. Rock and roll came later. Rhythm and blues was music that came out of the post-war, where the big bands uh, didn't really have venues anymore to work. People couldn't. Everybody was going back to work. Couldn't support the big bands, so the small groups came together with that same feel, and they called it jump blues. And so you started getting you started to have these groups that would play music with the same energy as a big band, but smaller bands. And Louis Jordan was one of those musicians. He played saxophone. A lot of musicians came up that way and and played music. So we started a show called the Golden Era, based on the Golden Era of rhythm and blues. It's still on the air today, and it shows you where everybody came and how it influenced a whole generation of rock and roll people. Um, Salsa con Jazz, another show that started, and that was bringing in the Latin influences from New York, Cuba, the Caribbean, and Africa and other places, Brazil, to form a 2 hour show dealing with the rhythmic elements from the from the African diaspora all the way through the current elements that we have today. And that's thanks to Steve. That's Tito Puente on the Google thing on his birthday, the two timbales and so forth. And then in the evenings, our ability to try to reach out a little bit to the people who are actually listening at 10 o'clock to midnight. This is not me, you know. So we have Jazz Odyssey, and these young musicians know no boundaries, and they're out there, and the people who support this music are out there in the community supporting it. So there's a portal there for them to be able to do this. There's artists like Lakeisha Benjamin and others who are bringing in these jazz sensibilities into their very personal statement as musicians.
I know there's a couple minutes and there might be a couple questions. So just a couple pictures from the Five Points Jazz Festival. We're happy to broadcast live from this event. Linda Theus Lee, Cleo Parker Robinson, the dance legend in Denver. It's nice to see a street filled up with music lovers. You see something like this maybe at one of the New Orleans festivals or on Beale Street in Memphis or in Nashville where there's club, music. There's even music in the airport. We're kind of excited about the music that we play here at KUVO. And so thank you for your attention, for your interest. We just say cheers.
Do we have
So,
any
yeah,
time for questions, or are we done?
yeah, we've got
Okay.
time for questions.
All right,
There's a
thank you.
mic here if you want to come to it, or Vanessa will be coming around with the microphone as well.
Oh, got to turn it on there.
Okay. Decades ago, I listened to jazz on the radio, and they would be my curator. They would do the selections, they would present, they would frame. They'd give me a little information along the way, and I'd hear things I wouldn't have heard otherwise. I don't need that anymore. Society doesn't need that anymore. I can go online right now and pick out something I like and hear it right now. And if I want to diversify my experience, there's a link that says people who like that also like this. And by the way, this person has their own playlist they put together, and you can listen to their whole playlist, and maybe your tastes overlap enough that it's interesting but you'll also grow because you're going to hear things you never heard of before.
Stu,
How
can we
do
ask
you
you to get
adapt
to your
to-
question, please?
How do you adapt to that? Yeah, we're fighting for our lives. That's exactly, you nailed it, because uh, people can get the music anywhere, uh, interruption free. Uh, so our job is to be the better curators. Our mix is an effort to be more interesting, more diverse, more connected. We also present community. And so people who are interested in a little bit of surprise, some personality, will perhaps try KUVO. It's a concern when people are growing up without a radio in the home. No radio in the home. So we've got to get on your phones. So if you could all take out your phones now, I'm going to talk you through how to load the KUVO app. Ready, everybody?
Any other questions? Anybody have any questions? Oh,
Right here.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks so much for speaking to our club. I'm a longtime fan of KUVO, and when we lived in Arizona, it was KJazz. And my question is essentially, um, jazz came along at a time of deep segregation and even apartheid in this country. And yet, when musicians play together, there's no skin color, no ethnic group. It's the music. So I wonder how musicians have worked their way through the deep segregation that existed in this country when jazz was evolving.
It took a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage um, on the part of the band leaders. Okay, it's no secret that Billie Holiday, a horrific time in the 30s and 40s. She worked in some of the most prominent bands, led by white band leaders who tried to break down barriers for her, by not staying, saying if she doesn't stay in this hotel, then none of us stay in here. There's countless stories like that. Of course, it became a little easier once the Voting Rights Act and the '60s rolled in. It became a little more apparent, and what you just described became a reality in a lot of ways. Uh, yeah, I mean, jazz is a reflection of an expression of the times that we live in, and especially in America. So it was the same thing for the blues musicians who were relegated to just playing for black audiences. Same thing. Buddy Guy is a huge star right now, and he's 85 years old. But he was playing in the early 50s, and he was just another black man. You know, so yes, there's a lot. There's a lot there. A lot of doors have been opened. A lot of racial stereotypes and stuff have been kind of swept away through music and particularly through jazz.
About 25 years ago, our s- our son was in the Fairview High Jazz Band and came down to KUVO. His jazz group was invited down to do a high school live performance, and that has absolutely changed his life. Um, in terms of, he's still a jazz musician today. He's also a mathematician, but he's leading several jazz groups down in the Sarasota, Florida area. Are you still doing that?
Yes, we are still doing that. It's called the High School Collegiate Series, and it happens usually the second, sometimes the third Tuesday of every month at 7 o'clock. And we do have a mix between high school and universities. There are some wonderful musicians, for example, who will come in from the Boulder School of Music and the Jazz Studies program. John Gunther heads up a program here. Others from UNC, one of the most prominent musical schools in the country, Lamont School of Music, Metro State in downtown Denver, headed up by musicians who are who are national recording artists who live here as well. So we're still doing it. And in fact, we've been doing it for so long now that we have certain musicians. I'll name one of them, Peter Summers, who plays saxophone up at CSU Jazz Studies program. He was one of those kids who came to KUVO and played as a young man in high school. And now he's heading up and he's bringing his kids as well. So yeah, it's part of our legacy.
Great. So we have time for one more question, okay?
This is an easy one. I walked past the Chapultepec bar the other day, and I was disappointed to see that they're fixing it up. It looks there's a lot of construction going on. I wondered if you know what's going on there.
With El Chapultepec? Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the club itself. I know that it passed hands onto someone else, but I do know that the Kranz family, both Anna and Angela, the daughters of Jerry Kranz, passed away a number of years ago, are now working hand in hand with Donald Rosa and KUVO to establish the Chapultepec Lounge at the new Dazzle at the Denver Center for Performing Arts, which is on 14th. So, and what that is essentially is that there was never a cover charge for that. So what we're doing is on one side of where the club is, after the main performances have been finished by about 10 o'clock, then it's free. Everybody can come in, and then there's a little piano lounge over there, and there's lots of pictures, and even the stage is very low and is checkerboard, black and white, just like the Chapultepec. So this is all just beginning right now, and we hope to do some I don't know if we want to call them podcasts or whatever, but we have about I'd say about 100 hours of broadcast analog tapes of music and bands that played at the PEC. We broadcast from there on Thursday and Sunday nights for about 2.5 years in the early 90s. And that music, and that has never been produced or aired since then. So that's another project that we're hopefully start working on to share again with our audiences. Thank you.
And thank you, Carlos and Steve, for that enlightening presentation. Your insights into KUVO and this remarkable 38-year journey from a humble listener-sponsored station to the cultural icon it stands as today is truly inspiring. The fact that KUVO remains one of the only flourishing jazz stations in the U.S. speaks volumes about its significance and impact. To the morning set and the entire KUVO team, thank you for keeping the essence of jazz alive and thriving. Now, Rotary International also has a remarkable 38-year journey to crow about. In 1985, Rotary International launched the Polio Plus campaign, aiming for global polio eradication. We've since reduced polio cases by over 99.9% worldwide. With over $2.1 billion in contributions and support from partners like the Gates Foundation, Rotary has immunized over 2.5 billion children. So in appreciation for your presentation to us today, and in your name, Boulder Rotary will contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus campaign.
Thank you. And we will be making an acknowledgement of that on the air next week when we get back on the air on Monday. Thank you.